All right, so Mr. Gerber here. So we are covering section 1.3, or starting to cover section 1.3 in this video and the following video, where we are going to look at space distribution, globalization, and diffusion. So again, these are really big concepts that are going to come up throughout the course and things that are going to be really essential to grasp them here within section 1.3, because these are things that are going to recur throughout the entirety of the course. So the chapter or the section starts off talking about globalization. I've moved that into the next video, moving that more into diffusion, because I feel like diffusion, it just fits really, really a lot better within that. So kind of move those around. So we're going to talk first with distribution in space in this first video, and then we will, feel free to take a look at the next video for globalization and diffusion. So the essential question is to understand the relationship between space and distribution within the cultural landscape. So understanding where things are located and why they're located within a given spot. And, the rest of the section also obviously expands upon those ideas. So our definitions, these are straight out of the book. All right, our space is the physical gap or interval between just two objects. So we want to know why people and activities are distributed across space as they are. So why do so many people live along the U.S. coast versus, why not many people living in Wyoming or Montana, and why are those people not really close to each other? But also, why are, baseball fields so heavily, densely located in certain areas while hockey rinks are in others? Why are movie theaters located where they are? Certain restaurants, gas stations, certain other types of businesses, like why are medical device centers located in certain areas versus other parts of the country or other parts of the globe? Why are factories where they are? Things like that. So that's when we talk about the space part. But within that, we also want to look at the distribution. All right, the arrangement of something across the Earth's surface. Why are things close or far from each other? And if they are there many or few? And then also why? And we look at those three main patterns listed down here within density, concentration, and pattern as the three ideas for why things are, or the three measures of how we look at the distribution across space. So our definition of density, pretty basic right here, is the frequency with which something occurs in space. So it involves two measures, the number of a feature and the given land area. So within this example map we have here of the United States, it is the land area within the United States. Okay, and it's state by state, which means that our number of a feature that we're looking at, the second measure, is density of population. Where do people live in the United States? Which states are the most, not really looking at density. In this case, we're looking at where do people live in the United States? Which states have the highest population? All right, and so density is going to be related to scale, as we're going to look at that in the next few maps here, look at why density is really, really important compared to just a general overall number. Okay, so in this case, the states that have the higher number of people, or the more people living in them, are the states that are the darker colors of red. The states that have the least population or less populated areas, or just fewer people living in the state. I'm probably not describing that very well, and I apologize if that's true. Are the lighter shades of red. All right, so California, Texas, much of the Northeast, and Florida are more heavily populated, but not necessarily in terms of the people per land area, which is going to be kind of one of the measures of density that we're going to look at here. All right, I'm not exactly sure what scale they're going with here because California doesn't have between 50 million and 100 million people. That's just not the case. But there is typically about between 500,000 and 1 million people typically within Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas in a given state. So looking at population density, all right, is the idea that we're taking a look at this map, all right, and with the idea of scale. Again, this is where information given to us by the map it becomes really, really essential. So whenever you're looking at a test or you're just looking at a map in general, look at the scale, look at all the information that the map is giving you. So we see state boundaries, cities over 100,000, cities between 350,000 and 100,000. And again, look at the number of people per square mile or square kilometer. So again, the darker the color means that there are more people living in those areas. The lighter the shade of white or yellow means that there are a few people living within a given county or a given area. All right, so this is more, specific than what we see here. You're like, wow, California must be a lot of people. And it does. It really, really does. But it's not the entire state. All right, or if you look at a state like, Rhode Island doesn't have a whole lot of people living in it. Okay, it's a pretty light color. but Rhode Island itself has more people living per square mile. And again, depending on the numbers you're using, it can be really, really interesting and can give you a lot of different information in terms of shades of color. Because if you were to go, instead of 500 people per square mile and you went 1,000, you would end up with different colors based on the scales and types that you're using. All right. So obviously you see more urban areas around big cities obviously are more densely populated. Okay. Areas that are more farmland or in the mountains or off in the deserts are typically less densely populated. Okay. Hence why areas within Nevada, Montana, the Dakotas aren't that heavily populated in many areas. All right. And so just kind of a quick review question. What type of map is this? You should think to yourself for a second. If you thought choropleth, you're good. All right. So just again, the idea of population versus the density. All right. Because again, that is a measure of distribution over space over time. Or not over time, just over space. So the largest state populations, California, Texas, and New York, but these are not the most highest densely populated. Okay, California, almost 40 million people, but only the 14th most dense, 239 people per square mile. All right, so it's got the largest population, but they're primarily concentrated within, Los Angeles and San Diego areas, and there's actually it's about a 2-hour drive between LA and San Diego, just so you know if you didn't know that before. In the Bay Area within San Francisco, Oakland, Sacramento, San Jose. And Sacramento is not in the Bay Area. It is, again, like another hour or two drive away from that. Same thing, Texas, second most populated state, but again, primarily within San Antonio, Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, El Paso, and their surrounding suburbs. Not so much in Western Texas itself. Again, it all depends on the areas that you're living in. Okay. The most dense states are the areas that have not necessarily the most population, but the most population in a very small area per square mile. So that's New Jersey with 1,200. It's the 11th most populated state. Massachusetts is number 3 with 840 and is the 14th most populated. But tiny Rhode Island, we kind of highlighted here, this little one in between Massachusetts and Connecticut. All right, not a very large state, not a very heavily populated state, but per square mile, the people are really, really condensed and up next to each other. Okay, we also take a look at that with the example of China. Okay, the most populated country on the planet with that, this is 2013 statistics, 1.36 billion. Okay, but it's only 80th in terms of population density, according to 2009 study, with 368 people per square mile spread out throughout the entirety of the country. Yes, it has the largest or the most cities with over 1 million people. But if you look at this map, again, people per square kilometer, all right, most of that is in the north central part of the country, going all the way down the coastline within that. And the further west you go, where you have mountains, deserts, highlands, plateaus, the least dense it is. All right, so if you were just to take off this part of China, the area that's in really, really dark green, it would be a higher density because you wouldn't have as much land. But China is a very big country. And so when you just take these areas in particular compared to those areas, you have to balance them out. So that's why, out of the 200 odd countries, China's, really barely in the top half or just in the top half because it has so much area that is not very hospitable and good for living. All right. But, areas along the rivers or along low-lying factories and along the coastlines, more heavily populated. Australia, again, same idea here within the idea of density and concentration. Okay, these 3 areas, Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne, pretty much are the 50% of Australia's population within these 3 blue areas. The rest of the country has the other 50% spread out throughout the rest of it. All right, so again, density concentration becomes really, really big. All right, Monaco is one of the tiniest countries on the planet, has just under 33,000 people, has less than 1 square mile around it, but because it's only less than a square mile, its density is actually higher because of its mathematical proportion, which I always kind of find funny. All right, so I've mentioned the word concentration here. That's the second way that we kind of vary this stuff. We kind of look at space and distribution. So the extent of a feature spread over space. So you have clustered versus dispersed concentration. So again, if you're looking at most like China, its populations are clustered, again, primarily in the eastern half of the country, in the central and southern eastern parts of the country. And there's more of a dispersal throughout the entirety of the country, but most of it's clustered over here. Okay. Within Rhode Island, it's not a big state, so most of its population is clustered in a tiny area. Same thing within New Jersey, hence why the population density is really, really high. Minnesota, 50% of the state's population is in the Twin Cities metro, so we're pretty clustered in terms of population in this, but spread out throughout the entire state means we are less dense. All right, hence why, again, a state like Texas is only the 29th most densely populated, so not even in the top half because it has all this extra land area on top of it. All right. So another example is sports teams, and the book uses that. So hockey, National Hockey League, we're looking at sports teams in 1970 within the National Hockey League. We're primarily located in the Northeast and the Midwest. So in the Great Lakes region, you didn't have a whole lot of teams out west. Hockey was not a very big popular sport in 1970, if you weren't, a hockey fan. But as populations have moved to the south and the west, so has the popularity of hockey expanded. So this is 2008, so we're still actually a few teams shy of this. But you can see more teams in the south, or any teams in the south, more teams out west. But you're missing Winnipeg Jets up here and the Las Vegas Golden Knights out here in Nevada. So again, pretty big dispersal within those. All right, and the last thing to mention here is the idea of patterns. It's just the arrangement of objects within space. And really the only really good example I can think of off the top of my head and that I keep coming back to is the way that city streets are laid out and neighborhoods. And within the United States, it's very much a grid pattern. It's very systematic and precise because we had a lot of time to kind of develop that with the government anyway, over the 250 years that the United States has been around as an actual country. That as the people moved further and further west, you see immigrants and more non-indigenous people living out in these areas. When they started setting up cities, they wanted to make it very easy to get around, and so you get these grid patterns that are very much right angles, very perpendicular to one another, very rectangular and square in shape. And this is where you see throughout much of the United States. Most towns kind of fit within this, and you get little changes here based on geography, lakes, rivers, whatever, kind of getting in the way of that. But for the most part, this is Chicago. It doesn't get more basic than this. And Minneapolis and St. Paul follow this, talking about right angles and stuff. You see, the streets kind of going all, in the same direction with the same, names and layout of all that. Compare that with Europe, where things have been kind of built over time, and there wasn't exactly initial planning around that. And, you have things initially centered around, churches. Obviously developed way differently than that because you have all these different, there's not necessarily straight lines going everywhere, kind of a mishmash of all that. And Boston is kind of an American city that kind of follows this initial pattern of Europe. A lot of the original American cities did that. But again, that changed over time the further out west we did to make layouts easier. So that's the geometric arrangement. So hopefully you kind of understand the ideas of density a little bit here. Density is going to be something we come back to, but also just the ideas of how we look at things across space within the ideas of distribution. So yeah, questions as always, let me know. Otherwise, we're going to kind of cut it off here. So the last video is going to talk about diffusion and globalization.